The tribe of Judah in the land of Japan. The history of the Israelites and Christians of Japan. Part 1. It turns out European excellence is Chinese. Italian leather comes from Africa. People spent thousands of dollars because they thought they were buying something special from a high-class European craftsman. That doesn't exist. This fact is being exposed by Chinese manufacturers on social media about European luxury brands. This reveal actually undermines European economies because these brands bring billions of dollars to their economies, and they are responsible for thousands of jobs. But most important, it reveals the truth about the Eastern and Western civilization partnership that has enriched the ruling class for the last 2,000 years. The ruling elite misled the general public into believing that there exist unbridgeable cultural gaps that forever keeps the world divided. But in reality, on the highest levels of society, there's a brotherhood and a friendship through bloodline that has always existed. Some nations promote this knowledge, and some nations try to conceal it. The Israelites have been taught through the Bible, the Torah, and the Tanakh that the world's population descends from Adam and Noah. The book of 2nd Esdras, chapter 6, verse 54. And after these, Adam also, whom thou madest Lord of all thy creatures, of him come we all, and the people whom thou hast chosen. Universal Center for Renovation presents Historical and Biblical Israelites. This video is strictly for educational purposes and commentary. This video is a biblical and secular historical literature, so enjoy. Israelites have always played the middleman between the various nations of the globe, facilitating trade and sharing of technology. The Chinese manufacturers are offering to completely break down the walls of separation and allow the American consumers to directly buy from them, cutting the cost of the goods that they are buying, making luxury items affordable to a wider audience or consumer base. One of the things that came out was that Italian leather actually comes from Africa. Moroccan leather can be traced to Kano, Nigeria. But instead of arguing over who should take the credit for the goods that we consume, more light should be placed on the trading networks that have existed for thousands of years to produce and move the goods. And the Israelites who were at the heart of this global trade The book of Matthew describes the true worth and status of Israel in the world. Chapter 5, verse 13 to 16. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt loses its saltness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and place it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. This is a moment to bring light to the true history of global trade. History of the Jews in Guinea. The history of the Jews in Guinea date back at least to the 15th century when Sephardic Jewish traders and explorers arrived in the region from Portugal. The contemporary Jewish community in Guinea-Bissau is very small. During the late 15th century and early 16th century, Portuguese Jews escaping religious persecution in Portugal during the Portuguese Inquisition formed Jewish communities along the coast of the Upper Guinea from Sierra Leone to Senegal, including in what is now Guinea. These Portuguese settlers, known as Lançados, married local African women and formed families. These mixed-race Black Sephardi communities are often known as Luso-Africans. Much early commerce along the Upper Guinea coastline was conducted by Lançados. What happened to the Lançados, the Jews that were thrown out of Portugal? Where did the Black Sephardi go? And what became of the Luso Africans? Dream a world anew. The African American experience in the shaping of America. From the National Museum of African American History and Culture. This is the history of the Sephardic Jewish traders of the article History of the Jews in Guinea. The Lançados, the Black Sephardi, also known as the Luso-Africans, became the African Americans and the enslaved peoples of the transatlantic slave trade to the Americas. Dream a world anew. On page 21, the Portuguese engaged in cultural interaction and intermarriage. These Portuguese were the Lançados, also called Black Portuguese. The Africans they intermarried with was the Jews of Balad al-Sudan, or the Jews of West Africa, also called Western Sudan. The Portuguese, or Lançados, engaged in cultural interaction and intermarriage, as well as trade with the Africans or the Jews of the Western Sudan, establishing unique communities. This new group of Luso Africans, people of Portuguese and African descent. Luso African means Portuguese Africans. They were often converts to Catholicism. There were Jews who were Catholic Christians. The first slaves to the Americas were Christians. Often converts to Catholicism who still practice some elements of indigenous African religions, Vudan. They formed a powerful merchant elite and was some of the first African-born people to travel freely to the Americas. They were also the black conquistadors, and they sailed with Columbus. Known as the Tango Mouse to the Portuguese or to the Portuguese government, they were also called Tangamos and Degradado. They were the ones who first made contact and lived with the so-called Indians of the Americas, the 10 tribes of Israel. They were the actual explorers of the Americas for the Portuguese king. These men were used as interpreters. Their knowledge of different languages, especially Hebrew, helped them to communicate with the Indians who were speaking broken Hebrew at the time. They spoke a syncretic language, sometimes called Guinea speech or Negro speech. They spoke a syncretic language known as Creole, which they created, also known as Guinea speech or Negro speech. It contains Hebrew words with Portuguese and West African languages mixed together. It was a universal language for West and Central Africa, a broken Hebrew language spoken by the slaves. By the early 1700s, Luso Africans numbered several hundred at Elmina. Elmina was the first trading post built by the Portuguese, also known as Elmina Castle. Erected in 1482, it was essentially a factory and a free trade zone where local Africans could interact with Portuguese merchants. And there were hundreds more at similar forts. Speaking about Luso Africans, down the coast to the Congo and Angola, Luso Africans also lived in the Kingdom of Congo. As the African trade boomed, these Creoles, as they were known, swelled the populations of major European capitals. The Luso Africans, these people were also called Creoles and Atlantic Creoles. They lived in the European capital cities of Spain, Portugal, France, Germany, Italy, England, Scotland, and Ireland, to name a few, as free people and as slaves. Approximately 10,000 Black people, both slave and free, of differing hues or different shades of brown, from light to dark. 10% of the population resided in Lisbon, the capital city of Portugal, in the 1500s. This was the start of a cultural and genetic fusion that spread all over the Atlantic world for 4 centuries. They, the Luso-Africans, intermarried with Europeans and assimilated. The author J.A. Rogers, from Sex and Race, uses the term miscegenation. The ancestors of African Americans were called Luso-Africans or Portuguese Africans and Creoles, and they spoke a broken Hebrew language called Negro speech or Guinea speech, a universal language of the slaves. Jewish autonomy and a slave society. Suriname in the Atlantic world, 1651 to 1825, by Aviva Ben-Ur. Page 26. Suriname is a country in South America, but it's considered part of the West Indies and the Caribbean. It borders Brazil. The term Creole, in a Surinamese context, both then and now, refers to Afro-Surinamese people who trace their origins to manumission or emancipation, in contradiction to Maroons, who have historically taken pride in the fact that their ancestors ran away from slavery rather than continue to endure it. The author, I use Creole interchangeably with Afro-Creole. They were called Creoles, a term used for the slaves of the transatlantic slave trade to the Americas. The shared language of Suriname, a combination of African, European, and Hebrew linguistic elements, has been known in the past several decades as Suriname tongue, Suranan or Suranan Tango. In 18th and 19th century sources, it is invariably referred to as Negro English, Negro speech, and Negro language. Hebrew linguistic elements. The slaves were using Hebrew words and phrases or terms. The Lançados were European or Portuguese Jews. Lançados means those that were thrown out. They were thrown out of Portugal during the Portuguese Inquisition. The Lançados, their children, became known as Creoles or Creolos, meaning to raise. They were raised outside of Portugal in West Africa. The Lançados, their grandchildren, were called Africans. By author Ira Berlin. From Creole to African, Atlantic Creoles and the origins of African American society in mainland North America by author Ira Berlin. The history of the evolution of different names of the slaves to the Americas, nicknames and bywords. In the end, it just helped to conceal their Israelite identity. But this was prophesied by Moses in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 28, verse 37. And thou shalt become an astonishment and a proverb and a byword among all nations, whether the Lord shall leave thee. A curse that would befall the Israelites when they broke the covenant or agreement between them and their God, Yahweh. When they came out of ancient Egypt, Lançados, those who were thrown out, Creoles, those who were raised in another land, and finally, Africans. This is for some of the Jews of West Africa. There are 12 tribes. Not all the tribes were called by these labels, just mostly the ones in West Africa. Going back to the article, History of the Jews in Guinea. These Portuguese settlers, known as Lançados, married local African women and formed families. These mixed-race black Sephardi. The term mixed race was used to describe some of the Jews from Guinea. Mixed race, biracial, and mulatto are terms that were used to describe Israelites or Jews, Jews meaning Judah, Benjamin, and Levi. Who is a Negro? Ancient Egyptian types. Mulatto of Greco-Roman period. From the book Sex and Race, Volume 3, author J.A. Rogers. This man was a first century Jew from Egypt, according to European historians. According to European historians, the Jews or Israelites appear to have dark skin tones to light skin tones. In the days when scientific racism was popular and Europe was trying to base its nationalistic ideologies on the concept of race, this troubled some intellectuals who wanted to label and place the Israelites into a racial category. In the end, they decided the Israelites were people of color and they couldn't be properly assimilated into certain European populations. This topic is still being fiercely debated in the year 2025. Regardless of the public, their personal beliefs, make no mistake, there were Israelites of different skin tones, from dark to light, And these were so-called Middle Eastern people whose descendants would be enslaved in the transatlantic slave trade from West Africa to the Americas. When the European nationalists realized this, it led them to commit extreme acts. They did not want to assimilate a population of people who they believe would change the genetics of their nation. If they researched a little deeper, they would have discovered that the ruling class element came from the same group, the black nobility. But they knew. But as the rap group X Clan said, this knowledge is deep. How deep? Deeper than Atlantis, deeper than the seafloor traveled by the mantis. You have to understand history filtered through the lens of the Bible and understand history from the ruling class perspective, their goals, their aims, and objectives. And that leads us to the Radhanites, a group of merchants who held a wider view on how the world works. They understood the world from many perspectives because they connected the European, African, and Asian worlds in a network of trade and financial global exchange. The Radhanites, early medieval Jewish merchants, active in trade between Christendom or Europe and the Muslim world, the so-called Middle East, during roughly the 8th to the 10th centuries. Many trade routes previously established under the Roman Empire continued to function during that period, largely through their efforts. Their trade network covered much of Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, and parts of India and China. Map of Eurasia showing the trade network of the Radhanites in the year 870 AD. These merchants held a bird's eye point of view. They were above local and national politics. If any kingdom or king needed something, these were the men to know: goods, merchandise, and intelligence. They knew what was happening in all the different kingdoms of the medieval world. A people without a national home of their own traveled the world and becoming a middleman for all nations and kingdoms of the medieval era. The world for the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi included Europe, Africa, and Asia. A people without a national homeland inhabited all lands and kingdoms of the ancient and medieval world. The Roman Empire scattered the southern kingdom throughout all the lands of the Old World. This is one of the main reasons they knew the 10 tribes were in the Americas. Judah, Benjamin, and Levi was in all lands and kingdoms in Europe, Africa, and Asia. The book by the author, Dr. Alan Goodbay, The Lost Tribes, a Myth, describes the colonies and settlements of the Israelites and Jews in Africa and Asia. It's basically giving us a view of the world from the eyes of the Israelites as they lived and traveled in and out of different kingdoms of the old world, and how they lived and settled in these different lands as strangers. Jews of Balad el Sudan, Sahelian Jews, historically known as Jews of the Balad al Sudan. In later years, Jews who were expelled from Spain and from Portugal, as well as Moroccan Jews, migrated to communities off the coast of Senegal and on the islands of Cape Verde. These Jewish communities continued to exist for hundreds of years, but eventually disappeared as a result of changing social conditions, persecutions, migrations, and assimilations. The transatlantic slave trade. Merchants traveling to the city of Timbuktu in West Africa. Merchants traveled from West Africa to Europe and China. This was a route of the Israelite merchants. The Jewish history of Mali begins in the 8th century when multilingual African Jewish Radhanites first settled in Timbuktu in the Songhai Empire. These medieval merchants established a trading center in the city from which a network of trading routes were created through the desert. The Israelites in Africa were never isolated from Europe or Asia and their brothers in those lands. The ruling elites always knew about the Israelites or the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi in Europe, Africa, and Asia. They, the Israelites, were used by the kings of Europe, Africa, and Asia as middlemen for business and merchandise. The ambassador from the Congo, Antonio Emmanuel Navonda, in the year 1608, he was the ambassador to the Vatican. This painting is from the Creole Palace in Rome, Italy, 1615 to 1616. Creole Palace served as the residence of Pope Paul V, 1605 to 1621, who Antonio Emmanuel Navonda was sent to see by the King of the Congo, Alvaro II, in the year 1604. As the previous video has shown, many Israelite colonies were located in the Kingdom of Congo. And for that reason, it will be shown in future videos and also in the previous videos that the ambassador and the king of the Congo were also Israelites who were converted to Catholic Christianity. Another ambassador that visited Pope Paul V was Hasekura Tsunenaga. He was from Japan, and he was a Catholic Christian, and most likely an Israelite. or Jew, Judah, Benjamin, or Levi, from Japan. The Catholics were converting Jews who lived in the nations of Europe, Africa, and Asia to Christianity. Hasekura Tsunenaga, 1571 to 1622, was a Christian and Japanese samurai. He was of Japanese imperial descent, with ancestral ties to Emperor Kenmu. His other names included Philip Francis Hasekura. In period European sources, as he took a baptismal name upon converting to Catholicism. In the years 1613 through 1620, Hasekura headed the Quechua Embassy, a diplomatic mission to Pope Paul V. He visited New Spain and various other ports of call in Europe on the way. On the return trip, Hasekura and his companions retraced their route across New Spain in 1619, sailing from Acapulco in the New World, America, Mexico, for Manila in the Philippines, and then sailing north to Japan in 1620. Although Hasekura's embassy was cordially received in Spain and Rome, it happened at a time when Japan was moving toward the suppression of Christians in Japan. The Israelites used ancient trade routes from the cities of the Medes, according to Dr. Goodbay in the book Lost Tribes and Myth. The influence of Israelite colonies in the cities of the Medes in northern Iran would extend as far as the political and commercial activity of their Medo, Persian, and Parthian kingdoms, where the Jews were living at the time. In the book of Acts, chapter 2, verse 5, and there were dwelling at Jerusalem Jews, devout men, out of every nation under heaven. Chapter 2, verse 9, Parthians and Medes. Israelites in Parthia was conducting commercial and political activities for the Parthians. Parthia and China maintained significant diplomatic, cultural, and economic ties through the Silk Road from around the year 200 BC onward. Parthian merchants were middlemen between China and the Roman Empire. Inside the book, Lost Tribes, a Myth, the book shows a detailed map of colonies from Palestine to India to China. And also to Japan. The Hata clan of Japan are documented as a colony of Jews who immigrated into Japan. The Silk Road was a trade route that connected Europe, Asia, and Africa. Rediscovering Japan, reintroducing Christendom, 2,000 years of Christian history in Japan. My author, Samuel Lee. Christianity has a 2,000-year history with Japan. It was Israelites who originally brought it to Japan. The Hata clan, or Judah, brought it to Japan. Hata means Judah. Quoting from the book, furthermore, in the 4th century AD, the Hata or Hata clan immigrated to Japan. They used to live near Lake Bakhash in Central Asia, but were pressured. Judah, the tribe of Judah, Benjamin and Levi. Judah lived in Central Asia. They were pressed, the Hata, into building the Great Wall of China. Later, they escaped to Korea and finally immigrated to Japan, having accepted the Japanese emperor's invitation to take up residence there. A look at the customs of the Hata people reveals that many features of this religion are Christian-like. There is even evidence that they believe in Jesus Christ, Yahweh the Messiah, and the Trinity. The Hatas were a part of the group of ancient Eastern Christians. They used existing Shinto shrines as their places of worship, so their Shintoism was a Christian Shinto, contradictory though it may seem. However, this is historical fact. Many people have the impression that Christian churches have stained glass, pipe organs, etc. These elements, however, only reflect Western style Christian practices. The ancient Eastern Christians had a style adapted to each individual country's culture. Judah built the Great Wall of China. Then they were invited into Japan by the Japanese emperor, who needed them for military purposes as soldiers to help the Japanese fight the Aborigines of Japan. Thus, the Hatas, who immigrated to ancient Japan, were the Eastern Christians. Furthermore, a theory suggests that they were also part of the 10 lost tribes of Israel and had converted from Judaism to Christianity. In the Western world, Jews seldom convert to Christianity, but it is known that in the Eastern world, some or many Jews and Israelites did. Unlike Western Christianity, Eastern Christianity respected Jewish traditions and even adopted some of them in their practices. The Hatas immigration may therefore have constituted one of the incoming waves of the lost 10 lost tribes of Israel to Japan. The Hata, or Judah, were the Christians of Japan. They assimilated with the Japanese, married Japanese women. They became Japanese by culture. P.Y. Saki, Yashiro Saki, born September 15th, 1871, died June 26, 1965, was a Japanese scholar of religion, law, and the English language. Peter Saki is his Christian name. He is known for his theories about the Church of the East, at the time referred to inaccurately as Nestorianism, in Jewish culture in Japan. Saki was a Japanese Anglican who became an expert on the influence of the Church of the East, which at one time existed in China. This is a quote from the book The Ancient Diaspora in Japan by Hasekura Tsunenaga. There are several theories as to the etymology of the word Yahata or Yahada. The ancient Nestorian Christians in China and Persia had adopted several Greek terms into their religious life. Some of these Greek terms had been in turn opted into the Greek from the Hebrew. One of these terms as Yahada. The famous scholar and anthropologist Dr. Yoshiro Saki believed that the term Yahada originally came from the Hebrew Yehuda, meaning one who is descended from the Hebrew patriarchs, Judah. These Nestorian Christians called themselves the tribe of the patriarch, Judah, and preserved their paternal community, and the Greek word became corrupted with time to be pronounced Hada. In the Nihon Shoki, there is an account that describes a serious clash that took place between the Yamato court and the Hata tribe because the court refused to recognize the patriarchal nature of the Hata clan. Yahada, Yehuda is Judah. Yahawada is how you pronounce Judah in the ancient Hebrew. It means thanks, Yahweh. It was corrupted into the word Hada. This is from the ancient diaspora in Japan by author Hasekura Tsunenaga. For a samurai to be brave, he must have a bit of black blood. A Japanese proverb. This Japanese proverb was used to celebrate the Hata, or Judah, their service for the Emperor of Japan. The Japanese people came from the east. They were having a little trouble taking over the island of Japan from the indigenous Ainu people. They, the Japanese, received military help from Judah, or the Hata, the samurais. For a samurai to be brave, he must have a bit of black blood. The Israelites are scattered among the Japanese and the Ainu people. The book of James, chapter 1, verse 1. A servant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, Yahweh Shai, the Messiah, to the 12 tribes which are scattered abroad, greetings. Judah, Benjamin, and Levi of Europe, Africa, and Asia knew that the 10 tribes were in the Americas.